Have you ever imagined what it would be like to be born into greatness, not by choice, but by destiny itself? Picture a cold winter morning in 356 BCE in the city of Pella, the bustling capital of Macedon. A boy was born who would one day change the world, Alexander, the son of King Philip II and Queen Olympias. From the very beginning, whispers of destiny surrounded him. His mother, Olympias, was a woman of remarkable intensity and conviction. She believed deeply in the power of the divine, often telling young Alexander that he descended from heroic bloodlines, even claiming connections to Achilles himself. Imagine being a child and hearing that your very life was intertwined with legends of gods and heroes. And then there was Philip II, a king whose ambition knew no bounds. Philip was a master of both war and diplomacy, commanding armies with precision and negotiating alliances with cunning. Alexander observed his father closely, absorbing lessons in strategy, politics, and leadership from a very young age. Even as a boy, he understood that power was a language spoken not just with swords, but with minds and words. From childhood, Alexander displayed extraordinary courage and intelligence. There's a story you might have heard, Bucephalus, a horse that no one could tame, terrified all who approached him. But young Alexander saw something others did not, a flicker of fear in the animal's eyes and the patience to work with it rather than against it. He gently turned the horse toward the sun so that it wouldn't be afraid of its shadow, mounting it with unwavering confidence. Have you ever seen someone so small conquer something so large simply by understanding it? That moment became a symbol of Alexander's character, bold, insightful, and fearless. Education played a central role in shaping Alexander's extraordinary mind. At the age of 13, he began learning under Aristotle, one of history's greatest philosophers. Aristotle did more than teach facts. He nurtured curiosity, instilled critical thinking, and opened Alexander's mind to philosophy, science, medicine, and the wonders of the natural world. Can you imagine sitting at the feet of Aristotle, listening to ideas that would shape the way you think about the universe? But Alexander's education was not confined to books and ideas. Macedon was a land of warriors, and young Alexander trained tirelessly in the arts of combat. Archery, swordplay, horsemanship, and tactics were all part of his daily life. He learned to move like a soldier, to think like a general, and to inspire loyalty in those around him. Even as a boy, he was not just learning, he was preparing to lead. His adolescence was filled with challenges that would test both his courage and his mind. He watched as his father expanded Macedon's power, uniting the Greek city-states under his influence. Philip was both a mentor and a standard that Alexander aspired to surpass. How does a young prince measure himself against a man whose name commands armies and kings? Alexander learned quickly, understanding that ambition alone was not enough. It needed to be paired with skill, strategy, and vision. Olympias played her own role, nurturing Alexander's ambition with stories of heroes and gods. She encouraged him to see himself as part of a grand tapestry, where destiny and courage intertwined. From these stories, Alexander cultivated a sense of purpose, imagining a world where his deeds would be remembered for centuries. Have you ever felt the weight of expectation and yet embraced it as a calling? This is how Alexander lived, learning to turn pressure into opportunity. Macedon itself was a land of contrasts. Cities thrived with trade and culture, while the countryside bred warriors and farmers. Alexander moved seamlessly between these worlds, learning from soldiers, philosophers, and diplomats alike. He absorbed the languages of strategy and diplomacy, of courage and intellect, crafting a mind that could understand both battlefields and councils of state. Even in his teenage years, Alexander's reputation began to spread. Stories of his bravery, intellect, and charisma traveled across Macedon and beyond. Allies admired him, rivals whispered about him, and soldiers began to see in him a future leader unlike any other. The boy who tamed Bucephalus had become a symbol of potential, a spark of something larger than life. And yet, Alexander remained hungry to learn, curious about the world beyond Macedonia. He studied history, geography, and the myths of the past, imagining the lands he might one day visit and the people he would meet. Homer's Iliad, the story of Achilles, inspired him deeply. He began to dream not just of victories but of glory, of weaving his name into the fabric of legend. By the time Alexander reached his late teens, he was no longer just a prince. He was a mind of immense capability, a body trained for battle, and a spirit guided by destiny. His education, his upbringing, his courage, and his vision all converged, preparing him for the challenges that lay ahead. He was ready to step into history. As you drift gently into sleep, imagine Alexander riding through the streets of Pella, the cold wind brushing against his face, the city alive with possibility, a boy on the cusp of destiny, dreaming of empires and legends. This is the beginning of a journey that will span continents, change civilizations, and leave a mark on the world that endures even today. Alexander's story has only just begun, and the world awaits his first steps toward greatness. Have you ever wondered what it is like to grow up in the shadow of greatness, yet be destined to surpass it? Alexander's teenage years were shaped not only by his own ambition, but by the formidable presence of his father, King Philip II. Philip was no ordinary ruler. He was a master of war and politics, a man whose vision transformed Macedonia from a fragmented kingdom into a powerful, unified state. Philip had faced a Macedonia fractured by rival clans and threatened by neighboring Greek city-states. He knew that to secure his throne and protect his people, he had to build an army unlike any the world had seen. He reformed the Macedonian military, creating the phalanx, a tight formation of soldiers armed with long spears called sarissas. Imagine rows of men moving as one, their spears stretching out like a forest of steel, impenetrable and precise. Alexander watched these exercises as a boy, absorbing the rhythm and strategy, learning lessons that would later shape his own legendary tactics. It wasn't just military skill that Philip taught, it was the art of leadership. He maneuvered alliances, married strategically, and secured loyalty from powerful families across Macedonia. Young Alexander saw the subtle ways his father wielded influence, using both force and diplomacy to achieve his goals. He learned that power was not only about victory in battle, but about vision, timing, and understanding the hearts of those you led. Even as a teenager, Alexander began to play an active role in these affairs. When Philip campaigned abroad, Alexander was entrusted with governing territories and commanding troops. At just 16, he led a Macedonian force to victory against the Maedi, a rebellious tribe in Thrace. Imagine a young man, barely old enough to vote in today's terms, standing before seasoned soldiers, inspiring them with courage and intelligence. This was the beginning of Alexander stepping out of his father's shadow and proving that he too could command loyalty and respect. Philip's successes extended beyond Macedonia's borders. Through cunning diplomacy and decisive campaigns, he subdued the Greek city-states, forcing them into alliances with Macedonia. The famous Battle of Chaeronea in 338 BCE was a turning point. Alexander, now just 18, played a critical role, commanding the cavalry with remarkable skill. He helped secure a decisive victory that ensured Macedonian dominance over Greece. It is said that his father, watching him on the battlefield, recognized that Alexander was not only brave but also a natural strategist. Yet, Alexander was more than a soldier. He absorbed lessons in culture, governance, and philosophy. He traveled with his father to observe city-states, learning the delicate balance between authority and diplomacy. He studied how laws, customs, and civic pride shaped societies, preparing him to not only conquer lands, but to govern them wisely. Do you see how a boy, learning in both war and wisdom, could begin to imagine an empire that stretched far beyond his homeland? Olympias continued to nurture Alexander's sense of destiny. She instilled in him a belief in his exceptional nature and encouraged him to see the gods as allies in his ambitions. At the same time, Philip's practical and tactical mindset grounded Alexander, teaching him to pair dreams with strategy. This balance between inspiration and pragmatism became a defining feature of Alexander's leadership style. Life in Macedonia was also rich with learning and preparation. Alexander trained tirelessly, mastering archery, swordsmanship, and horsemanship. He practiced tactics, studied terrain, and learned to anticipate the movements of enemies and allies alike. His mentors were not only Aristotle and his father, but also experienced generals and statesmen, who shared the wisdom of years spent in both council chambers and battlefields. As Macedonia grew stronger, so too did Alexander's reputation. Allies admired his intelligence and courage. Rivals began to take notice. Stories spread of the young prince who had already led armies to victory, who had tamed Bucephalus, and who carried the confidence of someone destined for greatness. He was no longer merely a student of strategy, he was a rising force whose presence inspired loyalty and fear in equal measure. Philip's reign was marked by ambition, but also by intrigue and danger. Court politics were complex, and threats to the throne abounded. Alexander observed how his father navigated these challenges, learning the importance of vigilance, timing, and decisiveness. He understood that a ruler's power depended as much on intellect and foresight as on physical strength or military might. By the time Philip had unified the Greek city-states under Macedonian influence, Alexander was no longer just a prince in training. He had experienced the art of war, the subtleties of diplomacy, and the weight of leadership. He had seen the power of vision combined with strategy, and he had begun to imagine a world where Macedonia was not merely a regional power, but the center of a vast empire. And then, as life often does, the world shifted in unexpected ways. Philip's assassination in 336 BCE changed everything. Alexander, only 20 years old, inherited the throne. A kingdom at its peak of power now rested on the shoulders of a young man still learning the full extent of his destiny. It was a moment of both immense risk and unprecedented opportunity. As sleep draws near, imagine Alexander standing on the balcony of the palace in Pella, gazing out over the kingdom his father had built. The streets below buzzed with life, soldiers drilled in formation, and the Greek city-states watched closely. The weight of expectation pressed upon him, yet his mind was clear, his ambition sharp, and his vision unshakable. He was ready to step into history, to take the lessons of his father and the courage of his youth, and to begin a journey that would stretch across continents and centuries. The stage was set. Macedonia was united, its armies strong, and a young king with the heart of a conqueror prepared to take the first steps toward a world forever changed by his ambition, intelligence, and courage. And so, the story of Alexander the Great continued, moving from the lessons of a brilliant father to the bold actions of a young king ready to shape the destiny of empires. Imagine the weight of the world suddenly resting on your shoulders. Alexander, at just 20 years old, inherited the throne of Macedonia in 336 BCE, after the shocking assassination of his father, Philip II. The kingdom was strong, the army experienced, and the Greek city-states watching every move. But Alexander was still young, untested as a ruler, and facing both opportunity and danger at every turn. Alexander's first challenge was to secure his throne. Macedonia, though united under Philip, was a land of competing nobles and ambitious generals. Revolts and conspiracies could erupt at any moment. Yet Alexander moved swiftly and decisively, demonstrating that his courage and intelligence were not limited to the battlefield. He eliminated threats, reassured loyal supporters, and established his authority. Can you imagine a young man, barely out of adolescence, standing before seasoned nobles and declaring his command over a kingdom? But Alexander was not merely a ruler concerned with survival, he was a visionary. He understood that maintaining power required both strength and respect. He traveled across Macedonia, inspecting garrisons, meeting with governors, and reinforcing loyalty among the soldiers who had once served his father. His presence inspired confidence. He spoke of ambition, glory, and the future, of Macedonia, awakening loyalty in the hearts of those around him. At the same time, Alexander looked beyond Macedonia's borders. The Greek city-states, still proud and independent, observed Macedonia's transition of power with suspicion. Athens, Thebes, and other cities debated whether to challenge the new young king. Alexander knew that diplomacy and strategy would be as important as military might in consolidating power. He sent emissaries, negotiated alliances, and, when necessary, prepared for war with precision and care. Alexander's first test came quickly. Revolts broke out among some Greek cities and regional tribes, yet he acted decisively, combining diplomacy with tactical brilliance. He marched armies swiftly, often surprising his opponents with the speed and coordination of his campaigns. Soldiers who had once followed Philip now followed Alexander with respect and admiration, inspired by his courage and leadership. Even in these early years, his brilliance in planning and execution became apparent. While consolidating power, Alexander continued to learn. He revisited the lessons Aristotle had taught him, pondering philosophy, ethics, and the nature of leadership. These reflections were not abstract. They guided his decisions in governance and war. He considered how a ruler could unite diverse peoples, integrate conquered lands, and leave a legacy that would outlast even the greatest kings before him. Alexander also nurtured his vision for the Greek world. He dreamed of uniting Greece under Macedonian leadership, not merely as a conqueror, but as a leader capable of inspiring loyalty and admiration. The lessons of his father, the teachings of Aristotle, and his own ambition coalesced into a clear plan. Macedonia would become the center of a larger campaign, one that would ultimately challenge the mighty Persian Empire. As he prepared for this monumental task, Alexander's reputation grew beyond Macedonia. Stories of his bravery, decisiveness, and charisma spread across Greece. He was not only a king, he was a symbol of ambition and potential, a leader whose youth did not diminish his authority but rather highlighted the promise of extraordinary accomplishments. Allies rallied to him, while adversaries watched with caution, wondering what the young king would do next. Even in the midst of political and military responsibilities, Alexander's personal qualities shone through. He was known for his generosity, his ability to inspire loyalty, and his keen understanding of human nature. Soldiers admired him not only for his tactical genius, but also for his willingness to share their hardships, leading from the front and experiencing the same challenges they faced. Alexander's early reign also solidified his approach to integration and governance. He began to weave together Macedonia and the Greek city-states, balancing power, influence, and culture. He encouraged local leaders to retain their customs while aligning them with Macedonian authority, creating a model of governance that combined respect with strategic control. By the time he was ready to embark on his first major campaign against Persia, Alexander had already proven himself as a decisive ruler, a brilliant strategist, and a visionary leader. His early years as king had forged the qualities that would define him for the rest of his life: courage, intelligence, ambition, and an unyielding desire to achieve greatness. As sleep gently settles around you, picture Alexander standing on a hill overlooking the Macedonian army, the morning sun reflecting off the armor of his soldiers. He feels the weight of responsibility, the thrill of ambition, and the clarity of purpose. Every decision, every movement, every strategy is part of a larger vision. The young king is ready, and the world beyond Macedonia awaits him, filled with challenges, wonders, and the promise of glory. The stage is set for the next chapter, the campaign that will take Alexander and his army beyond familiar lands, across mountains and rivers, into the heart of the Persian Empire, where destiny and ambition will collide to create one of history's greatest stories. Have you ever imagined standing on the edge of the known world, with the weight of ambition pressing on your shoulders and the horizon filled with lands you have only dreamed of? For Alexander, that moment came in 334 BCE, as he prepared to lead his army across the Hellespont and into Asia Minor. He was 20 years old, a young king with a vision that reached far beyond Macedonia, and the mighty Persian Empire awaited him. Before the crossing, Alexander took a moment to address his soldiers. These men had fought for his father, and now followed a young king whose reputation had already begun to spread. He spoke of honor, of glory, and of the chance to carve their names into history alongside his own. Can you imagine the courage it took for these men, knowing they were about to face an empire more vast and powerful than any they had known? Yet, Inspired by Alexander's confidence, they felt ready. The first major test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Alexander faced a Persian army that vastly outnumbered his own forces, yet he had a secret weapon, strategy. He studied the terrain, positioned his troops with precision, and led a charge that caught the enemy off guard. The Macedonian phalanx moved as one, while Alexander's cavalry struck decisively, breaking the Persian lines. The young king had shown, even in this early battle, that courage paired with careful planning could overcome overwhelming odds. After Granicus, Alexander continued his advance through Asia Minor, liberating Greek cities under Persian control and gaining allies along the way. Each victory strengthened his position and spread his reputation. Soldiers, merchants, and rulers alike began to see Alexander not merely as a king but as a force destined to reshape the world. How does a young man, so far from home, inspire loyalty in those who do not know him? Alexander's combination of bravery, intellect, and vision made it possible. The next challenge was the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE. Here, Alexander faced King Darius III himself, the ruler of Persia commanding an enormous army. The stakes were higher than ever, yet Alexander remained calm, studying the enemy and finding the weak points in their lines. Leading from the front, he charged into the heart of the Persian forces, creating chaos and demonstrating a fearlessness that inspired his soldiers. Darius, overwhelmed and surprised by the young king's strategy, fled the battlefield, leaving his army in disarray. Victory at Issus brought not only military success, but also strategic advantage. Alexander gained control of the eastern Mediterranean coast, securing supply lines and winning the loyalty of key cities. He treated captured populations with a mixture of respect and pragmatism, integrating them into his growing empire rather than ruling through fear alone. This approach would become a hallmark of his campaigns, the ability to conquer without crushing, to unite rather than simply dominate. Alexander's journey also carried moments of reflection and wonder. He visited the ancient cities, studied the cultures, and observed the customs of the peoples he encountered. Though he was a warrior and a conqueror, he was also a student of the world, learning from each land he passed through. Can you imagine a young king leading armies through deserts and mountains, pausing to understand the lives and stories of the people he would one day rule? These experiences shaped his vision of empire, blending Greek culture with the diverse traditions of the lands he conquered. By the time he approached the coastal city of Tyre, Alexander had not only demonstrated military genius, but also the ability to inspire and govern. Tyre, a fortified island city, refused to surrender, presenting a challenge unlike any he had faced. Yet, Alexander's determination never wavered. Through ingenuity, patience, and relentless effort, he orchestrated a siege that eventually brought the city under his control, solidifying his reputation as both a brilliant strategist and a determined leader. The campaign continued southward, and soon Alexander reached Egypt, a land of ancient wonders and powerful traditions. There, he was welcomed as a liberator, and he founded the city of Alexandria, a symbol of the fusion of Greek and local culture. The Oracle of Ammon proclaimed him the son of Zeus, reinforcing the sense of destiny that had guided him since childhood. Each step of the journey seemed to confirm what Alexander had always believed. He was not just a king of Macedonia, but a man destined to leave a mark on the entire world. As sleep draws near, picture Alexander standing on the shores of the Mediterranean, gazing across the waters toward lands that had been, until now, only distant legends. The wind carries the scent of conquest, of cities yet to be won, and of empires waiting to be reshaped. He feels the thrill of battle, the weight of responsibility, and the clarity of vision that guides every decision. With courage, wisdom, and unyielding ambition, Alexander continues his journey, leading men and nations into history, one bold step at a time. The Persian campaign had only just begun. Mountains, rivers, and deserts lay ahead, along with cities, kings, and armies that would test his genius. Yet Alexander, the young king who had already tamed horses, led armies, and outsmarted foes, was ready. His story, stretching across continents, was unfolding with each sunrise, each battle, and each calculated choice. The world was his stage, and destiny awaited. Have you ever imagined standing before a city so fortified, so proud, that even the strongest armies hesitate? For Alexander, the challenge of conquest was not only about defeating opponents but also about testing his ingenuity, patience, and courage. After victories at Granicus and Issus, he faced cities like Tyre and Gaza, places that resisted surrender and demanded extraordinary strategies. Tyre was unlike any city Alexander had encountered. Built on an island and surrounded by strong walls, it seemed almost impregnable. How do you capture a city separated from the mainland by water, defended by thousands, and fortified against even the cleverest siege tactics? Alexander's mind raced with possibilities. He devised an ingenious plan, constructing a causeway of stone and timber to connect the island to the shore, allowing his soldiers and siege engines to reach the walls. For months the work was slow, grueling, and dangerous, yet Alexander inspired his men with courage and determination. They pressed on, step by step, against the impossible. The siege of Tyre tested not only military skill, but leadership. Alexander endured harsh winds, relentless resistance, and the uncertainty of an enemy who would not yield. Yet his resolve never faltered. He moved among his troops, encouraging them, sharing their hardships, and demonstrating that no challenge was too great when met with strategy and courage. Finally, after months of effort, Tyre fell. Alexander's patience, intelligence, and leadership had turned what seemed impossible into victory. After Tyre, Alexander turned his attention to Gaza, another strategic city guarding the road to Egypt. Here, too, the defenders resisted fiercely. Alexander's army faced massive walls, fortified gates, and well-prepared soldiers. Yet, using siege towers, battering rams, and careful coordination, he overcame the defenses. Each victory was a lesson in perseverance, planning, and the importance of understanding both the enemy and the terrain. Conquering these cities was not merely about military triumph, it was about securing strategic routes, supply lines, and the loyalty of the people. Alexander often treated captured populations with pragmatism, offering mercy and integration for those who surrendered, while dealing decisively with resistance. This approach balanced fear with respect, ensuring that loyalty was earned rather than forced. It was a hallmark of his leadership, demonstrating foresight and a vision beyond simple conquest. Egypt welcomed Alexander as a liberator. The pharaoh's lands, rich with history and culture, embraced the young king. Here, Alexander demonstrated a different kind of leadership. He founded the city of Alexandria, planning it as a center of Greek culture, learning, and trade, a city that would endure for millennia. Can you imagine walking through its streets, seeing scholars, merchants, and artists mingling, all under the gaze of a king whose ambition touched every corner of the known world? In Egypt, Alexander also visited the oracle of Ammon at Siwa. The oracle declared him the son of Zeus, reinforcing the sense of destiny that had guided him since childhood. For Alexander, this was not mere flattery. It confirmed the path he had long imagined. His ambition was no longer only personal, it was divine, intertwined with the will of the gods, and destined to reshape the world. With Egypt secured, Alexander turned north toward Mesopotamia, where the Persian Empire awaited. He was no longer just a king of Macedonia or a conqueror of cities. He was a general, of unmatched skill, a visionary leader, and a symbol of ambition realized. Each battle, each siege, each city that fell under his control added to the growing legend of Alexander the Great. As sleep gently enfolds you, imagine Alexander standing on the walls of a conquered city, the wind carrying the scent of distant lands, the sounds of soldiers preparing for the next campaign, and the knowledge that his journey is far from over. Every city, every mountain, every river he encounters is a step toward destiny. He has learned the patience of sieges, the ingenuity of tactics, and the power of vision. The world is vast, filled with challenges, wonders, and opportunities, and Alexander is ready to meet them all. The story of Alexander's conquests continues, moving ever eastward into the heart of Persia, where kings, armies, and civilizations will test his brilliance and ambition like never before. His journey is a testament to courage, intelligence, and unyielding determination. A story that echoes across time, inspiring generations even as you drift into dreams. Have you ever imagined standing on a battlefield where the fate of an empire hangs in the balance? For Alexander, that moment arrived in 331 BCE at Gaugamela, a plain in Mesopotamia, where he faced King Darius III and the full might of the Persian Empire. The stakes could not have been higher. Thousands of soldiers on both sides, armies stretching as far as the eye could see, and a young king whose ambition and courage would decide the course of history. Darius's forces vastly outnumbered Alexander's, with chariots, cavalry, and infantry forming an intimidating wall of soldiers. Yet Alexander's mind was calm, focused, and precise. He studied the terrain, assessed the enemy's formations, and positioned his troops with meticulous care. Every soldier, every cavalry unit, every phalanx was arranged for maximum effectiveness. This was not just a battle, it was a carefully choreographed dance of strategy and courage. At dawn, the battle began. Alexander led the charge at the center, striking with speed and precision. His phalanx advanced like a moving fortress, while cavalry units flanked the Persian lines. Alexander's boldness inspired his soldiers, who followed him with unwavering loyalty. Can you imagine the courage required to charge into the heart of an enemy army, knowing that victory depended on every decision you make in those critical moments? Darius attempted to counter Alexander's tactics, but the young king anticipated his moves. With brilliant maneuvering, Alexander pierced the center of the Persian lines, creating chaos and confusion. The enemy faltered as Alexander pushed forward, and Darius, seeing the tide of battle turn, fled in his chariot. The Persian army, once seemingly invincible, scattered in disarray. Victory at Gaugamela was decisive. It marked the collapse of Persian power and confirmed Alexander's status as one of the greatest military minds the world had ever seen. Yet his approach to victory was not merely about force. Alexander treated captured cities with pragmatism and diplomacy, securing loyalty while respecting local traditions. He understood that ruling an empire required more than conquest, it required vision, understanding, and the ability to unite diverse peoples. Following Gaugamela, Alexander advanced into the heart of Persia, taking Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, the great ceremonial capital. Persepolis, a city of immense wealth and culture, symbolized the glory of the Persian kings. Alexander allowed his troops to loot the city, but ensured that its cultural and historical significance was remembered. He walked through grand halls, imagining the legacy of Cyrus and Darius, reflecting on how he would shape history while respecting the past. In the aftermath of victory, Alexander continued to consolidate his empire. He integrated Persian soldiers into his army, encouraged marriages between Macedonians and local populations, and studied the customs, languages, and governance of the lands he had conquered. His empire was vast, stretching from the Aegean Sea to the heart of Persia, yet Alexander's ambition and vision pushed him further, ever eastward, toward lands that even the Persian kings had only dreamed of controlling. As sleep draws near, picture Alexander on a hill overlooking the battlefield at Gaugamela, the wind carrying the distant sounds of retreating armies, the glow of fires marking conquered cities, and the weight of victory pressing gently on his shoulders. He feels both the triumph of strategy and the responsibility of rulership. Every decision, every movement, every conquered city is a step in a journey that will define the world for centuries to come. The fall of Persia was only one chapter in Alexander's ever-expanding story. Beyond these lands lay new challenges, unknown peoples, and the mysteries of distant territories. Yet the young king, tempered by education, experience, and vision, was ready. With courage, intelligence, and unyielding ambition, he continued forward, shaping empires, inspiring loyalty, and leaving a legacy that would echo across time. Have you ever imagined marching across vast deserts and towering mountains, leading an army, far from home, into lands unknown, where every step carries both danger and discovery. After the fall of Persia, Alexander turned his gaze eastward into the rugged landscapes of Central Asia, lands of fierce warriors, hidden valleys, and rivers that seemed endless. The journey was not easy. His army faced harsh deserts, scorching heat, freezing nights, and rivers that had to be crossed with ingenuity and courage. Alexander, ever the visionary leader, moved at a pace that tested the endurance of his soldiers while keeping them united and inspired. He shared their hardships, sleeping under the same stars, marching beside them and encouraging them with words of courage. Can you imagine the bond between a king and his soldiers, forged not only in battle, but in the quiet, grueling moments of the journey? One of the greatest challenges came from the fierce tribes of Sogdiana and Bactria. These regions were mountainous, their people skilled in guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and the use of terrain to their advantage. Alexander adapted. He studied the land, understood the enemy's patterns, and led his troops with patience and cleverness. Every hill, every river, every canyon became a part of his strategy, and slowly he overcame resistance, one victory at a time. The siege of the Sogdian Rock was legendary. A fortress perched atop a sheer cliff seemed impossible to conquer. Yet Alexander, undeterred, inspired his men to scale the cliffs using ladders and ropes, demonstrating that no obstacle was insurmountable when met with courage, ingenuity, and persistence. The fortress fell, and with it, the legend of Alexander's audacity grew even stronger. Soldiers and enemies alike marveled at the young king, whose vision extended beyond the visible horizon. Alexander also sought to unite the peoples he conquered, understanding that loyalty came not only through fear, but through respect and inclusion. He adopted elements of local customs, married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and encouraged his soldiers to form alliances through marriage with local women. This blend of cultures was a hallmark of his leadership, creating a sense of unity across a vast and diverse empire. Even in these remote lands, Alexander remained a student of the world. He observed rivers, mountains, and the people he encountered, recording knowledge of geography, culture, and strategy. He was not only a conqueror but also an explorer, mapping territories, learning languages, and absorbing the wisdom of the lands he traversed. Imagine a young king leading armies through deserts and mountains, yet pausing to understand the stories and traditions of the people he would one day rule. Despite hardships, Alexander pressed onward, driven by ambition and a desire to reach the edges of the known world. His campaigns in Central Asia were marked by both brilliance in strategy and empathy in leadership. He knew that the loyalty of his army depended on their belief in his vision, their confidence in his judgment, and their respect for his courage. Each day brought new challenges, yet Alexander faced them with clarity, determination, and the same fearless spirit that had tamed Bucephalus years before. As sleep gently embraces you, picture Alexander standing on a high ridge, looking out over the vast mountains of Central Asia. Rivers wind through valleys, forests stretch across hills, and the distant horizon promises new lands to explore. The wind carries the weight of history, the echoes of battles won, and the quiet promise of victories yet to come. Alexander feels the thrill of discovery, the weight of responsibility, and the clarity of purpose that guides every decision. The Central Asian campaign was only one chapter in Alexander's journey. Beyond these mountains lay even greater challenges, unknown territories, and the mysteries of the distant lands of India. Yet the young king, tempered by experience, guided by vision, and inspired by destiny, continued onward. His story, a tapestry of courage, strategy, and ambition, stretches across continents, inspiring awe and shaping history even as you drift into dreams. Have you ever imagined venturing into lands so distant and mysterious that they feel like another world? After conquering Central Asia, Alexander's ambition carried him further east toward India, a land of great rivers, dense forests, and kingdoms ruled by kings as fierce as any he had faced. Every step was a journey into the unknown, a test of courage, strategy, and endurance. The first major challenge of the Indian campaign came at the Battle of the Hydaspes River in 326 BCE. King Porus awaited Alexander with a strong army, including war elephants, massive creatures that could strike fear into the hearts of soldiers. How do you face an enemy that seems to embody both power and unpredictability? Alexander studied the terrain, the river's currents, and the disposition of the enemy forces. Patience, observation, and strategy became his allies. On the day of battle, Alexander executed a daring plan. He crossed the river under the cover of night, positioning his troops carefully and preparing for the chaos that would unfold. When the battle began, his phalanx advanced with precision, while cavalry units struck Porus's flanks. The elephants, enormous and terrifying, caused initial panic, but Alexander's leadership and his soldiers' discipline overcame the fear. Step by step, the Macedonians pressed forward, adapting to the elephants, the river, and the enemy formations. The Battle of the Hydaspes was fierce, and yet Alexander's brilliance shone through. He moved with the flow of battle, making split-second decisions, inspiring his troops, and turning fear into courage. Porus, impressed by Alexander's skill and valor, was treated with respect after his defeat. Alexander reinstated him as a ruler, demonstrating that even in victory, diplomacy and fairness could strengthen loyalty and unity. Beyond the battlefield, Alexander marveled at the landscapes and cultures of India. He encountered towering rivers, dense jungles, and diverse peoples with traditions far removed from those of Greece or Persia. His curiosity, taught by Aristotle and nurtured through experience, guided him to learn from these cultures, studying their customs, governance, and ways of life. Imagine a young king riding through unfamiliar lands, observing, listening, and absorbing knowledge even as he marches his army forward. Alexander's campaigns in India were not only about conquest, they were about exploration, integration, and the forging of an empire that spanned continents. He encouraged his soldiers to interact with local populations, to learn from them, and to adopt practical innovations, blending Greek and local knowledge in both military and civic affairs. Each step further east was a lesson in leadership, vision, and the art of uniting people under one banner. Yet even the greatest ambitions face limits. Alexander's troops, exhausted from years of campaigning, battles, and marching, through harsh terrain, finally expressed their desire to return home. The army had crossed mountains, rivers, and deserts, faced elephants, and battled fiercely, but the longing for familiar lands and families grew too strong. Alexander, wise and attentive to his soldiers' morale, listened and agreed. He turned his army westward, beginning the journey back toward Babylon, carrying the spoils. Knowledge and experience of a journey that had stretched the edges of the known world. As sleep gently settles around you, picture Alexander standing on the banks of the Hydaspes, looking across the wide river at the lands he has conquered and the kingdoms he has influenced. The elephants, the soldiers, the distant forests, and the flowing water all reflect the enormity of his journey. He feels both triumph and contemplation, knowing that every battle, every decision, and every challenge has shaped him into a leader of extraordinary vision and courage. The Indian campaign was the final push into uncharted territories, expanding the horizon of Alexander's empire and deepening his understanding of the world. Yet his story is far from over. The journey back to Babylon, the consolidation of his empire, and the dreams he carried of connecting cultures, cities, and peoples would continue to define his remarkable life, leaving a legacy that echoes through history even as the night carries you into rest. Have you ever imagined returning from a journey so vast that the lands you once knew feel like memories, and the world beyond feels like a dream? After the Indian campaign, Alexander led his weary but loyal army back toward Babylon. The journey was long, filled with rivers, deserts, and mountains, but also with reflection and vision. Each day brought the weight of empire, the memory of battles won, and the knowledge of lands explored. Babylon welcomed Alexander like a returning conqueror and a wise king. The city, rich with culture, history, and learning, became the center of his empire once more. Here, he began the work of consolidation, blending the diverse peoples and territories he had conquered into a unified realm. He encouraged Greek and Macedonian settlers to mix with local populations, promoted trade, and supported learning and innovation. The empire was not merely held together by force, it was nurtured through culture, respect, and vision. Even in these final years, Alexander continued to pursue his curiosity. He studied astronomy, medicine, and geography, seeking to understand the natural and human worlds he had traversed. He commissioned maps of distant lands, recorded the cultures of the peoples he encountered, and sought ways to connect the far-flung corners of his empire. Can you imagine a young king who had already achieved more than most could dream still, reaching for knowledge and understanding as he rested by the rivers of Babylon? Yet life as a ruler was not without challenges. Revolts occasionally erupted, and the vastness of the empire meant that communication and control were constant struggles. Alexander handled these with the same combination of decisiveness, strategy, and vision that had defined his campaigns. He balanced firmness with diplomacy, reward with respect, and authority with inspiration. During these years, Alexander also reflected on his ambitions. He dreamed of connecting East and West, building cities, roads, and infrastructure that would unite his empire. Alexandria and other cities he founded became symbols of his vision, places where cultures mingled, knowledge was shared, and commerce flourished. He sought not only to conquer, but to leave a lasting imprint on the world, a network of cities and ideas that would endure long after his passing. Yet even the greatest lives are bound by time. In 323 BCE, at the age of 32, Alexander fell ill in Babylon. Despite the care of physicians and his own resilience, he passed away, leaving behind an empire that stretched from Greece to India, countless cities, and a legacy of exploration, conquest, and cultural fusion. The world mourned, yet celebrated, the life of a man who had changed history through courage, intelligence, and vision. As sleep gently takes hold, picture Alexander walking through the streets of Babylon last time, seeing the armies he led, the cities he shaped, and the lands he had touched. He feels the weight of accomplishment, the fulfillment of destiny, and the quiet satisfaction of having stretched the limits of human ambition. His journey was a story of vision, strategy, courage, and exploration, a story that continues to inspire even now, long after the battles are over and the cities are silent at night. Alexander's final years remind us that greatness is not only measured by victories, but by vision, by the ability to learn, to unite, and to leave a legacy that shapes the world. Even as the night carries you into dreams, the story of Alexander the Great continues to echo across time, a gentle reminder of ambition, courage, and the power of a single life to touch the world. Have you ever wondered what it means to leave a mark on the world, so deep that even centuries later, your story continues to be told? Alexander the Great, though he lived only 32 years, accomplished more than most could imagine in a lifetime. His conquests reshaped continents, connected cultures, and inspired generations of leaders, scholars, and dreamers. Even after his passing in Babylon, Alexander's empire did not vanish instantly. His generals, known as the Diadochi, divided the lands he had conquered, founding kingdoms that carried his influence across Egypt, Persia, and Central Asia. Cities he founded, such as Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning, trade, and culture, bridging East and West. Imagine bustling streets filled with scholars, merchants, and travelers, all thriving because one man had dreamed of connection and exploration. Alexander's military genius became legendary. His strategies are still studied in academies and military schools today. From the disciplined phalanx formations to his bold flanking maneuvers, he showed the world how courage, vision, and adaptability could overcome even the largest armies. Every battle he fought, every siege he endured, contributed to lessons that continue to inspire leaders centuries later. But Alexander's true legacy was not just in conquest. It was in the blending of cultures, the curiosity about the world, and the vision of unity. He encouraged the exchange of ideas, the mixing of peoples, and the respect of traditions. He believed that the strength of an empire lay not only in power, but in understanding, connection, and innovation. His life reminds us that leadership is not only about victories but about the ideas and communities we leave behind. As you drift further into sleep, picture the vast empire stretching from Greece to India, the cities filled with voices, trade and culture. Picture the soldiers who marched for miles under his command, the scholars who studied the libraries he inspired, and the peoples whose lives were forever touched by his vision. Alexander's story is a quiet whisper across time, a reminder that one person's courage and ambition can ripple across the world. Even in the stillness of night, his legacy lingers. Mountains, rivers, cities, and ancient roads all bear the echoes of his journey. Every map, every story, every lesson of strategy or leadership carries a trace of Alexander's life. Though he is long gone, the dream of reaching beyond the known, of connecting the world and of inspiring others continues to resonate, gentle and enduring. And as sleep carries you further into dreams, remember Alexander not just as a conqueror of lands, but as a dreamer who believed that the world could be bigger, more connected, and full of possibility. His life, short but extraordinary, teaches us about courage, vision, and the quiet power of leaving a legacy that shapes the world long after we are gone.